Daniel Ricciardo's fate is the biggest question mark in Formula One right now. Since leaving Red Bull in 2018, he has never found his way back to the top. Hopes were high when Ted Kravitz reported that he could be reuniting with Red Bull next year. But Ricciardo has had a massive backflip over his plans. So what went wrong this time? And who is the one-man Ricciardo thanks for his career? Stay tuned for all of that and more coming right up. First up, the man responsible for Daniel Ricciardo. It takes a village to raise a child, and it takes at least one Formula One team to raise a driver. In a sport that's built on carving out each opportunity, those who help along the way aren't quickly forgotten, and Ricciardo has pointed to one man for pushing his career along more than anyone else. Red Bull Racing have achieved miraculous things over the past 17 years of their existence. Their junior team has raised drivers like Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen, and once upon a time, Daniel Ricciardo. After the news that Red Bull founder Dietrich Mateschitz died, Ricciardo was one of the first people to reflect on his life. He said that what he did for Red Bull athletes was phenomenal and selfless. An entire generation of athletes in unorthodox sports have Red Bull to thank for making their careers. And apart from his family who supported him early on, Ricciardo credits his racing career to Dietrich. He took a chance on Ricciardo to help him chase this dream of racing in F1. Ricciardo said that it was a massive loss to the Red Bull family, but also to all of Formula One. Mateschitz preferred not to be in the limelight, but he was still intimately involved in running the team. Max Verstappen dedicated his second title to the boss, and Ricciardo may have been reflecting on why he left Red Bull in the first place. But he tried to seize the moment and make a bold gamble.
But yeah, it was such a small thing, it hurts to be penalized that.
So why does Ricciardo think that pay drivers deserve respect? After getting picked up by Red Bull as a young driver, Daniel took the chance with both hands. He impressed at HRT and Toro Rosso until a place at Red Bull opened up. He had to do it the hard way though. So what does he think about the paid drivers who were given seats? In the last few years, drivers like Nikita Mazepin, Lance Stroll, and Nicholas Latifi have all made their way into Formula One through the wealth of their families. It has become a part of the politics of the sport, and Lewis Hamilton has claimed that his path into F1 wouldn't be possible today in the Billionaire Boys Club. Ricciardo doesn't have as strong an opinion. He thinks it's complicated. Speaking on the Your Mom's House podcast, Ricciardo said that whether it's through sponsorship or family, money has to come from somewhere. But he said that once a driver makes it to F2 or F1, they are still putting their bodies on the line, and for that, he respects them. Being a pay driver doesn't mean not being talented. Lance Stroll has impressed fans with his consistency and racecraft, but there's no doubt he was given a big advantage by his father Lawrence buying the team. At this point in his career, Ricciardo might be wishing that his father was able to buy him a team too. It would make things a lot easier, that's for sure.
Really like to spend too much time on it, so it's just quick and it lets the team know that I've acknowledged.
Next, Ricciardo's new passion. Even though he's known for his driving skills, Ricciardo has plenty of other interests, and he has launched a clothing brand in the past, but now has his eyes on another area. Ricciardo just opened a new Instagram account exclusively for his photography, following in the footsteps of his teammate Lando Norris, who has done the same. The page earned over 300,000 followers in just a couple of days, and the most recent post showcases all the loves of his life. There are pictures of traveling, himself, and of course his girlfriend Heidi Berger. Ricciardo said that he just started pressing a button, and the collection is a mix of his personal life and artistic shots. More importantly, Ricciardo looks to be enjoying his life. Unfortunately, his professional life isn't as joyful. He is stuck between a rock and a hard place, with McLaren letting him halfway through this season. It wasn't a huge surprise because McLaren CEO Zak Brown had been publicly critical of Ricciardo, but tearing up his contract a year before it was set to end was a big statement. Brown said that the Honey Badger wasn't meeting the expectations of the team. McLaren clearly didn't believe in Ricciardo getting his mojo back and have instead opted for raising the new prodigy of the sport, Oscar Piastri. And he doesn't have many options left for next year unless he's willing to take a massive sacrifice.
This year it's Indianapolis.
So you're heading over to Indianapolis. That was my next question.
Up next, why does Button think that Ricciardo won't be returning to F1? And how did Ted Kravitz backflip on his big scoop about Ricciardo's 2023 plans? So don't go anywhere. Button doubts an F1 return for Ricciardo. Maybe Danny Ric just needs a little time away from the sport. This year marks his 12th year in Formula One, over which time he has moved between 4 teams and competed in 230 races. So failing to find a team for next year might actually be a blessing in disguise. 2 former world champions don't think think that he would ever return, though. Former world champion Jenson Button said that people tend to forget how good Ricciardo is because he's had such a difficult year and a half. But Button thinks that his talent and skill are still there. His only worry is if Ricciardo takes time away from the sport. He thinks that the better move for Ricciardo would have been to accept a less competitive team and prove that he's still got it. Now he runs the risk of only being remembered for his time at McLaren. And he's not the only one. Double world champion Mika Hakkinen agrees with Button and thinks that Ricciardo hasn't given good enough explanations for his failure to get results. He thinks that the fact is that Ricciardo hasn't been open enough about why his performance has been dropping. He may point to the car setup, but Hakkinen thinks that something is going on mentally that Ricciardo's not sharing. He may have lost his edge, which means that it's time to give it up. Hakkinen said that once drivers leave the sport, normally you shouldn't come back.
2 times Formula One world champion Mika Hakkinen.
Next, Ted Kravitz does a 180. If you've ever been the black sheep, then you'll have an idea about how Daniel Ricciardo must be feeling right now. Ever since McLaren announced that he wouldn't be donning the papaya uniform next year, he has been looking for direction. Teams like Haas, Williams, and Alfa Romeo all confirmed that they held discussions with the Australian, but none of them came to anything. His next best option seems to be taking the route of reserve driver and hoping it leads back to a permanent seat. But then the big question was, who would he be signing with? If Ricciardo isn't going to take a step back for a team like Williams, the offer would have to come from a top constructor. Fans were excited when it was reported that Ricciardo could be headed back home to Red Bull after 4 years away. On top of that, journalist Ted Kravitz announced that Ricciardo had closed out a reserve driver spot for 2023. Kravitz then gave us one more clue. He said that the team wasn't Mercedes, and that only left Red Bull, who are the only other team to take reserve drivers to every Grand Prix. Ricciardo kept his lips sealed and said that there was still no pen on paper. Only a few days later, Kravitz edited his scoop. Now he says that it looks more likely to be Mercedes rather than Red Bull. Make up your mind, Ted. We are all desperate to know who Ricciardo will be driving with.
Now and get the other measurement.
I knew you'd go there.
Meanwhile, Mercedes are taking their time. All good things take time. That's why Mercedes aren't rushing into anything. They've been the most successful constructor in the last decade by calculating every move. That's why the Silver Arrows are leaving their options open for next year's reserve driver. Ricciardo may have been heavily linked to the team, but nothing is official yet. When Toto Wolff spoke about Ricciardo's place in the team, it was his impression that the Australian had been shopping around. Toto said that Ricciardo had been speaking to a few teams about a potential role, including Red Bull, but that didn't stop Toto from praising Ricciardo, who he described as having a great character and a lot of valuable experience. Lewis Hamilton originally said that Ricciardo was too talented to be stepping down to a smaller role in a team, but the timing could be perfect for Danny Ric to take a reserve role at Mercedes. The Silver Arrows are on the lookout for a replacement for Nick de Vries and Stoffel Van Dorn. While de Vries has been pinched by AlphaTauri, Van Dorn will be running as a reserve for Aston Martin. Ricciardo said that he would love for Hamilton to stay in the sport and keep racing against him, but if he heads to Mercedes, then he could be waiting for Hamilton's retirement. And given the choice between a good competitor and a world championship, it's safe to say that most drivers would take the trophy. Will Ricciardo return if he takes a break from the sport? And can you imagine him racing for Mercedes? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more F1 content.